Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should start the proceedings. My name is Tony Redpath. I'm VP Partner Programs here at MaRS. Delighted to welcome those of you who have not been at MaRS before and to welcome back many old friends who we have seen at other events. Before we start today's talk, I'd like to invite a colleague of mine, Earl Miller, to do something we shamelessly do at all of these events at MaRS. Since we have a captive audience, we'd like to billboard another event that's coming up in a little while we've got your attention. So, Earl, over to you.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks very much for the introduction, Tony. I just wanted to bring your attention to an event which is happening here at MaRS on February 24th to 25th. And it's the conference is titled Innovation Across Borders. It's a global conference for small and medium enterprises. This conference will be brought to you by NRC IRAP, Department of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, and MaRS. And our objective is really to focus on best practices for SMEs in the area of trade and innovation. We believe that innovation is essential for both competitiveness and growth, and yet there are many opportunities which many small and medium enterprises may not be aware of. We're trying to bring together an international audience of SME leaders, of practitioners in the field of international trade, as well as representatives from different countries around the world, including Japan, Chile, India, Netherlands, USA, Mexico, Israel, and of course Canada, all with the idea of sharing with an audience like you best practices in both innovation and trade. So far we have got a very exciting list of chairs and panelists, including Martin de Vries, who's president of Trojan Technologies in Canada, Dr. Kevin Lynch, who was formerly the secretary of the Privy Council in Ottawa and who's now vice chair of the BMO Financial Group, Richard Bendis, who is the president and CEO of Innovation America, and the Honorable Gary Goodyear, who is the federal minister of State for Science and Technology. So we'd really encourage you to look at your calendars, see if we can make time for this two-day event, which will bring together an international group of individuals to create a dialogue about how we can advance both innovation and trade here in Canada and around the world through collaboration with other countries. So thanks very much for your attention.
And Earl, I can assume that's going to be posted on the MaRS websites and registration and all the usual, so go there for more details if you're interested. So, to today's talk, this is part of the MaRS Best Practices series, Going International, 10 Essential Facts, and I am really delighted to welcome today's speaker, Qamar Rizvi. Now, he has spent many years in international business, having lived, worked, and traveled to over 30 countries across 3 continents. He honed his craft with the Gillette Company. He had a number of multiple foreign assignments, and I think the key one here, at age 29, he was promoted to assistant director of their international business management group. And he was handpicked to be part of a headquarter team that led the worldwide launch of Gillette's Mach 3 razor in Latin America, Africa, Asia Pacific, Middle East, Russia, and Eastern Europe. I am probably the worst person at MaRS to be introducing someone who actually, within 18 months, led to over $1 billion in sales of a razor product. However, we're nothing if not ironic around here at times. It was the most successful launch in Gillette's history at that time. So he assumed the role of regional director for Gillette's Asia Mideast operations based in Dubai. And now he has gone out on his own as president and CEO of Acumen Inc., and it is a boutique management firm helping Canadian companies expand overseas. And most recently, as a client, he's been helping Tim Hortons in their decision to go global. And I can't think of a more iconic Canadian company going global. So I think that'll give you a flavor of his broad experience in international business. And I'm going to ask Qamar to come up and give you the 10 essential facts. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much.
Well, as Tony mentioned, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Tony mentioned, my name is Qamar Rizvi, and I'm the president and CEO of Acumen Inc. I founded the company with a singular purpose, and that's to help Canadian companies get global, expand into international markets. And I guess what makes us different is we actually provide a turnkey international solution with an emphasis on real-world results. And what I mean by turnkey is we take responsibility for the entire project management, from planning to execution. So essentially, if you will, we help our clients go through a virtual experience, an actual real-life experience of going international. And in terms of real-world results, what we do is typically three things. We strive to establish a foreign foothold within 12 to 20 months or less. And thereafter help them expand into 20 markets within 3 to 5 years or less again. And in the process, we help grow our client revenues by 50 to 100% or more. And whenever I say that, invariably, I sort of get a comment, don't you think that's a little bit ambitious? And my answer is yes, you bet it is, but you better get used to it. Change your paradigms, because that's what international markets does to you. So that's basically what we do in a nutshell, and who I am. Our topic today is going international. 10 essential facts, not opinions, facts that you must know about going international. But before I get into those 10 essential facts, I would like to take a little bit of your time and talk about the first half of that equation, which is going international. This is a topic that's very near to me and it's very dear to me. Now, I know Tony mentioned my background. Yes, it's true I've practically held a front row seat to globalization since I was 6 months old. But that's not why I get excited about this. That's not why I'm energized. That's not why I'm driven. That's not why I stand here before you today. It's not even my experience, yes. As in the case with Gillette Mach 3, I was fortunate enough to see the transformative power of globalization, which in the case of Mach 3, when combined with innovation, can deliver growth on steroids. Absolutely amazing. And by the way, that's not just true for new products or new brands or even new companies, but globalization can transform an entire economy. And again, I've seen that happen firsthand. In the 1990s, I was in Dubai, early 90s, and at that time, Dubai was a sleepy town. It was way out there in the desert, practically insignificant from an international recognition perspective, I guess. I think there were maybe 600, 700,000 people at the time in Dubai. Well, today it's the third largest re-export center in the world, after Singapore and Hong Kong. Third largest, 20 years, 2 decades. That's how transformational globalization can be, and I've seen it firsthand. And we've got other examples. Dubai set the stage on a regional basis for other cities, other countries, other markets. Abu Dhabi took the lead. Qatar took the lead. Lebanon took the lead. Saudi Arabia took the lead. Lebanon, by the way, has been embroiled, as we all know, in conflict and war for 30 plus years. Well, last year, Lebanon grew their economy by 8.9%. India and China, I could go on and on. India and China, same time frame, 1990s. As and when they opened up their marketplace, they transformed themselves. Today, they're the top 5 economies of the world. I don't know if we've had, I don't know if you ever spent just a moment to think about how impactful this whole international equation is in the economies of emerging markets. I mean, if you take away international trade, if you take away exports from India or China, where will there be today? Economic doom and gloom. You could bring one move, take away exports, one move, and you bring Indian economy, Chinese economy, Brazilian, Middle East, you bring them down to their knees. That's how powerful it is. That's globalization. But it's not the reason. It's actually not the reason why I'm here today. It's not the reason why I get driven and excited about this. The reason is as follows, and you heard it first here. The reason is that if we as a nation, if we Canadians as a nation embrace globalization and not evade it, then I reckon we could be the first developed nation in the world that could be classified as an emerging economy. That's what excites me. Yes, just like India and China and Brazil and Russia, we could be enjoying silly economic growth. It could impact every single person in this room, outside this room, in Toronto, across the nation, very profoundly and very positively. That's what excites me about globalization. That's how big it is. And in case if you're wondering why is it that Canada actually has this unique opportunity amongst developed nations, what makes us unique, I guess, what makes this whole moment unique, is that the other developed nations have actually already used their export card. The United States, Europe, Japan, all the developed economies have actually used their export card. We are the only ones sitting at the table of G8 that are, that has a full deck of cards. Now, that doesn't mean to say, by the way, that we aren't exporters. We are. I mean, if you look at the energy sector, oil, coal, if you look at resources, forestry, fertilizer, auto manufacturing, we're quite formidable exporters. But that's it. Outside of those 3 sectors, we're undeveloped. Those 3 sectors, by the way, represent 75% of our exports, 75%, 3 sectors. Now, what would happen if we could develop the other sectors of our economy? It's worth pondering. And not just diversify ourselves from a sector perspective, but even from an actual market perspective, country perspective. 90% of our exports, 90% go to industrialized nations. 80% go to the United States. One country takes 80% of our exports. I would say there's a lot of room to grow there. By the way, in case you're wondering, India and China combined account for 3%. 3% of our exports go to India and China. The fastest growing economies of the world account for 3% of our export. So I really believe the opportunity to go international is tremendous beyond means. One more anecdote that I'd like to share with you. And this was quite surprising to me. Industry Canada conducted a survey about a few years ago. It was entitled Profile of Growth Firms. And 2 key findings. Now, there were a lot of good findings, but 2 key findings that I'd like to quote. One is exporters represented 5% of total firms in Canada. 5%. But they accounted for 47% of the million jobs created. How disproportionately positive is that? I mean, 5% of the market, 5% of total firms accounting for 47% of the jobs created. Just imagine if that number goes higher, beyond 5%. That's what drives me in terms of international expansion. The other fact of that report was that of all the firms, the ones that were most likely to be international, hyper growth firms and strong growth firms were the ones that pursued international expansion. So clearly, there is a correlation between jobs and between growth. And I think this should raise eyebrows for business executives and government policymakers alike. Because for businesses, globalization delivers a solution to our most pressing need today, and that's growth. And for policymakers, it really can resolve what lies at the heart of our economic recovery, and that's creates jobs. So, so those are the reasons. I just wanted to put that in perspective, I guess, that how important this whole topic is. Now, how do we get going? How do we get global? Well, that's what basically drove me to find Acumen, to found this company called Acumen. And in my dealings, I've found the biggest mistake we can make is to jump into planning without having a conception of international markets, without having a perspective of what globalization is. It's the worst thing you can do. I can give you a lot of anemic plans with anemic results that have gone international. That's because they haven't done it right. They've got the wrong perspective. These 10 essential facts, and again, they're facts, they're not opinions, they will help you understand, comprehend international markets, globalization in a much more factual way, in a way that's going to help your planning and in a way that will actually help your execution, in fact. So without further ado, fact number one. Globalization is reality. Simple and obvious, I know that. With all the press coverage that we're getting, I know it's a very simple fact. But I don't know how much we've internalized this, at least to an extent where it's created or sparked an action. I think many of us tend to get surprised. I don't know if that's clear or not. Okay. I think many of us get surprised when we actually realize that globalization is not a one-year phenomenon. It's not a 10-year phenomenon. It's been happening for 100 plus years. What you're seeing in that chart are two bars, if you will, or two color combinations. The one at the bottom, which is the darker orange or the darker red, I guess, is the proportion of global trade versus the one on the top, which is much more of a brighter orange, is domestic trade. And the early 1900s, as you can see, the ascension of global trade has gone from 10% when it was largely driven by the United Kingdom, all the way up to about 60% to the decade of, I guess, 2000. And McKinsey estimates it's going to reach 80% by 2020s. The point I wanted to make in this chart, and the point that I want you to take away, is that as early as 1990s, if you were a business owner, if you were a manager, you could get away with local thinking. Because even at that time, domestic trade represented 65%. So the environment was not as global, if you will, relatively speaking, as it is today. But today you can't get away with it. You just can't. You can't put your head in the sand and say, and pretend it's not happening. Pretend it won't come to you and affect you. It will. globalization is a reality. And I think we'll have to learn as a nation, or I guess do a better job to deal with it. Broad Grain is a great example of a company that has accepted this reality and capitalized on it. They were a small farm based out of Ontario, trading in soybeans, grains, cereals. And for those of you that may be involved with a young company or a startup, this is great news. I mean, they went from a startup to a global player. Zaid Kadomi talks about it. He says, we started out in 2003 and with just one employee. That was me. And today there are 45 people, and we're doing in excess of $400 million in sales across North America, South America, Europe, Middle East, and North America. And that's what I talked about earlier, change your paradigm. $400 million in sales from 2003, from one employee to 45 employees. That's how transformational it can be. And if you imagine the compound effect of companies in Canada that could adopt a similar approach as Broad Grain, how dramatically impactful that will be on us as a nation. I love this quote from economist Paul Erdman. What we're experiencing today is a process of globalization that is as irreversible as it is inevitable. That we now live in an age when goods, capital, technology, and people are free and able to move from continent to continent on a scale and speed unimaginable just a couple of decades ago. And that it is those who take advantage of these realities who will be the prime producers of wealth in the 21st century. The key takeaway that I want, essentially, from this fact is every business must have an international plan. In case if you don't have it, I think you should start working towards one. It's absolutely critical because globalization is a reality. Fact number 2, globalization is an entry into growing markets. What I've done here is just very simply plotted some growth rates. This is the forecast for 2011. What you'll see on your left is the US, Canada, European Union, and what you'll see towards your right are regions for Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and in the middle I've got some countries, Russia, Brazil, emerging economies, and obviously it's a tale of two cities. You've got some impressive growth rates there. And it's not just a growth rate in terms of Brazil, India, Russia, and China. It's also the size, by the way. India will be, they're saying, McKinsey is estimating 400 million people will be demanding new housing in the next 10, 15 years in India. China is building, and these are all McKinsey numbers, China is building or investing in 40 billion square meters of floor space and 50 skyscrapers. That's equivalent to 10 New York cities. Growth is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. And just while I have you on this chart, I think it goes beyond numbers, though. I mean, if you look at the US, and if you look at Europe, and you look at, pretty, low growth rates, I guess, of 1 or 2%, the horizon is not all the more better, by the way. These are best estimates. We are living in times in developed economies where we have accumulated debt at every single level of the economy. It's at a personal level, it's at a business level, and it's at a government level. And the way that we've chosen to deal with this, rightfully so, is to create jobs. And the vehicle that we've opted for to create those jobs is a fiscal measure, if you will, or a monetary measure. Fiscal is we've invested in stimulus spending. Monetary is that we've kept our interest rates at a record low levels. Both of them haven't created jobs, but they have created more debt. We are going from a leveraged economy to a hemorrhaged economy. It's bound to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen. a year, 2 years, 10 years, 2 decades. In contrast, markets outside of Canada, the US, Europe, Japan, they haven't created debt, they've created wealth. There's still a pretty high savings rate, a pretty entrenched savings culture in markets like India and China. So I think you need to actually go beyond numbers when you look at growth. You need to actually look at the long-term horizon as well. And that's where foreign markets actually are quite appealing. Excuse me. Wigmore is a Saskatchewan company, or a family farm, I guess, that has really taken advantage of operating in growing markets. Greg Menzies talks about it, and he says, we've evolved from an 8,000 acre family farm to a 43,000 acre facility. We regularly turn down customer orders. We regularly turn down customers because the farm can't meet the large orders. Again, it's a paradigm of how big and how large the growth and the opportunity can be. By 2012, we plan to be managing as much as 200,000 acres. So that, again, gives you some perspective. And again, going from a family farm to a global player. A.D. Carney had a great quote that sort of put, at least in my mind, this whole perspective of growing markets. The 21st century will be Asia's century. Global power is irresistibly shifting to Asia. Today, Asia is experiencing what the West did in its industrial revolution. Back then, Western societies enjoyed an impressive improvement in living standards of 50% in a lifetime. Now, Larry Summers has calculated that comparable figure for Asia today is 10,000%. So again, just to put it in perspective and to have the right paradigm when we're talking about international markets and the opportunity that stands before us. The key takeaway from this fact is obviously Asia is the growth engine of the world economy, and it needs to be priority number one. One quick advice. In my experience, you'd be making a mistake if you dashed out of this room and started to build an India plan or a China plan or an Asia plan. You need to understand the big picture first. My suggestion is to work on an international plan, on an international strategic plan before you get into an India plan or a China plan. Why? Because often what can happen is that if you start working on a specific market plan like a China or India, without the benefit of having the clarity and the direction of a big picture, then you could develop a China plan that's divorced from your core competence and your core strategy and set you up for failure. It's a very popular mistake. I don't suggest that you guys should focus on the markets first, focus on a global plan first. And that international plan, by the way, would force you to look at your current Canadian business as well. So it would be an entirely global plan. That's the right way to do it. Fact number 3, not just growing markets, but globalization can give you access to spending customers. And I think this chart says it all. India is growing at, in terms of consumer spending, very different to how developed economies are moving in terms of consumption. India is 400%, China is 500%, 575%. Now, these are ginormous numbers in terms of consumer spending. But what I wanted to do here is take you there, if I may, the best way I can. Now, what you're seeing there, and I apologize if you can't see this very clearly. First of all, I took these photographs. Second of all, I guess it's not very clear, perhaps, because of how it's being relayed. But anyways, but I hope what you can see there, and imagine, and this is, by the way, photographs of a store called Carrefour. which is the equivalent, for those that may not know, which is the equivalent of a Walmart, perhaps a Loblaws in Dubai. And it's a French hypermarket chain. I believe it is the second largest in the world. And this is what their store looks like. I mean, imagine if you went shopping on the weekend, and I mean, this is an intimidating experience to me. I mean, imagine your shopping aisles. This is consumption explosion. People are buying a lot of stuff. A lot of people are buying just a lot of stuff. And this is what the store looks like from the outside. And again, it might not be very clear, but there's just simply a lot of people that are actually spending a lot of money. Last year when I was in China, these are the pictures I took. The one on the left and on the top, I guess, is McDonald's in Beijing. And the one on the bottom is Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, a cafe in Shanghai. It's hard to find an empty seat. And I often find when you go to a cafe or to a restaurant in China, the first thing you need to do is, don't submit your order. Go and grab a seat, grab a table, because there's just so many people out there, it's hard to find a seat. That's what I mean by spending consumers, a lot of activity. Now, it's not surprising, and I think this perhaps could be the most powerful chart of the whole presentation. If you see what's happening, again, I use the word transformational. If you see how India and China in just 2 decades, ever since they opened up in the 1990s, how they transformed themselves. This is the percentage share of the population that divides their income level, if you will. And the blue bar that you're seeing, for example, in 2005, the blue portion, is the percentage of people that are poor or were poor in 2005, combined in India and China, 68%. Anything above that, which is the green or the purple portion, is either lower middle class, upper middle class, or affluent. And 32% of the middle class, whether they were lower or upper, and of the affluent people, there were 32% of within India and China in 2005. Now that's expected to go to 82%. These are our McKinsey numbers. That's expected to go to 82%. That's 2.5 billion people in the year 2025. Of the 2.5 billion people, 82% will be either middle class or affluent. That's what, 2 billion people. 2 billion people marching towards middle class. And once you get that in perspective, it's not surprising to see this immense consumption trend that's actually happening. The Wall Street Journal talks about Asia, and they say Asia will assume the traditional role of the US and the European middle class, contributing to 43% of worldwide consumption in the next 20 years. The key takeaway essentially is, a very important one, is that international markets doesn't necessarily mean dollar shop customers. I get this often. You know what? I don't want to sacrifice. We in North America are infatuated by our product margins. It doesn't matter if we're selling or not, but we love our product margins. And that's fine. I come from a background where we were really challenged to deliver high product margins in terms of Gillette. And I understand that. But it doesn't mean that if you expand into China or India that you have to sacrifice those product margins. It doesn't necessarily mean that. And that's the point that I wanted to get across from this chart. The second largest market for Porsche in the world, after Germany, is China. So, and they haven't, I'm sure, sacrificed their margins a lot. On top of that, actually, if you do it right, and I'm not going to get into some of the examples, by the way, Research in Motion is one, and so was Gillette and many other companies. If you do it right, you do deliver profitable growth velocity. So not only do you get growth, but it's profitable growth, and not only is it profitable, you obtain it at a fairly fast pace. Fact number 4, it makes strategic sense. I mean, we've talked about it, obviously, in terms of its reality, growth markets, spending customers. It makes strategic sense. And I think the fundamental check or the fundamental criteria to test the success of any strategy is its ability to deliver new customers. Because ultimately, that's how you grow your business, is that you actually add new customers. And if you look at the vehicles that you have in place or the strategic options that any business, doesn't matter if you're small or large, that any business has in place, you only have 3 options to attract new customers, to grow your business. Only 3. There isn't a 4th, assuming organic growth. Either you get into new markets, you launch new products, or you move into new segments. Now, new products and new segments are part of the innovation, I guess, option, if you will. And new markets could be globalization. And again, Mach 3 was a great example of that. Apple is another great example. They've launched new products like iPhone. They've moved into new segments beyond computers, like online digital sales. And new markets, obviously. 60% of their sales come outside of North America. So don't choose. Don't choose between innovation and globalization. You don't have to do that. Go for all 3. I think it makes a lot of strategic sense to do that. Shaftesbury is an example. I used Gillette and Apple. A great Canadian example is Shaftesbury, which is a producer that's into television, but they've also moved into new segments, movies and kids. They've got new programming, new products, and they're also expanding themselves into new markets. Christina Jennings, a quote from her: "From the outset, we've been successful at selling our product internationally. Our top markets are France, Germany, UK, US, and Latin America. We're also making inroads in Japan and Asia, including the recent sale of 52 Hours of Murdoch Mysteries to China's biggest broadcaster, CCTV." Imagine Murdoch Mysteries being sold and being viewed in China. So it really does make strategic sense. Like Japan in the 1970s, China and India are gaining global market share today, but are doing it even faster. What should you do? You can wait and get knocked over, or you can try to right it. The worst possible strategy is to ignore it, hoping they'll ignore you. They won't. The best strategy is to work with them and compete with them. So the key takeaway with this fact, I guess, is as you look to build your business and to manage your business, it would be advisable to pursue a balanced growth strategy, which is both innovation as well as globalization. New products, new markets, and new segments. Fact number 5. Globalization makes operational sense, which really wasn't the case before. It's fantastic. And I think this is a great opportunity because if you look at the number of regional trade agreements that are being signed and that exist today, in 1990 there were 50 regional trade agreements that facilitated the movement of goods, product, technology, services, everything, freely, without barriers, country to country. By 2005, that number rose to 250. And it's not really surprising because if you recall, the first chart, when I talked about globalization being a reality, we saw the jump from the 1990s onwards, how dramatic that uplift was. And it's not surprising that you're seeing the number of regional trade agreements on the rise as well. Telco Bridges is a Quebec telecom company that developed a unique product that could handle incoming, a switch that could handle more than 500 calls at a time. It could handle 2,000. And they took advantage, especially if you're in the technology sector, I guess. With the advent of the World Wide Web, it makes it a lot easier to actually take your product, your service, your expertise on a transnational basis. The company went global in 5 years, thanks to the reduction in, I guess, barriers to entry in all these international markets. Canada only makes up 1 to 2% of our business, and the US market just 5 to 6%. 25% comes from Latin America, and the rest is split between Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. The company has employees in Paris, Singapore, Silicon Valley, and Hong Kong. So again, they took advantage of the fact that, operationally, it's a lot easier to expand into markets beyond your existing home market. For perhaps the first time, according to McKinsey, for perhaps the first time in history, geography is not the primary constraint on the limits of social and economic organization. And I guess the key takeaway that I'd like to leave with you here with this fact is declining entry barriers actually equals speed to market. And it's a great advantage because you don't have to wait all this time to develop a global empire or to develop a global business, thanks to the declining entry barriers. Well, it makes strategic sense. It makes operational sense. I'd be surprised if it didn't make financial sense. Globalization offers you size and scale. You can't get big. You can't achieve scale without expanding into new markets. Perhaps you can if you're incredibly, incredibly good at what you do in one market. And if there are barriers to entry, if you don't have foreign competition, yes, there are some scenarios where you can achieve that, but it's not very typical. And size and scale is the holy grail in business. It's what China has, and India has, and other markets have. It's what Gillette had, economies of scale, because that reduces your costs, improves your margins, erects these high competitive entry barriers. And that's why there was no other Chinese product that could topple Gillette, because we had these economies of scale. By the way, Mach 3 made $1 billion in 18 months, but Mach 3 took $1 billion to produce. The only reason why we could invest, we had the audacity to invest $1 billion in a razor, was because we had the economies of scale. Nobody else could do that. McCain Foods in Canada, based out of Florenceville, New Brunswick, they've developed a food empire in part thanks to their emphasis on new markets. They're in 130 markets, $8+ billion in sale. And the interesting anecdote on that is they produce 1 million pounds of potato and French fries products per hour. That's scale. That's pretty good scale. Research in Motion, they have size and scale. A new company, a Canadian company, $15 billion in sale last year. 3 years before that, which is in 2007, there were $5 billion. So they tripled from $5 billion to $15 billion in 3 years, with the help of new markets. SNC-Lavalin, another Canadian company, construction company, $6 billion in sales, 100+ markets. The best example, though, if I can move on to the next chart, is Aldo. It's the most recent, relatively, I guess. And it's also not only because it's recent, but it's selling shoes, for God's sake. Aldo is the most successful retailer that Canada has ever built. Their $1.5 billion shoe empire spans 1,500 stores, 55 countries. It is now eyeing new markets in China, Brazil, Japan, Italy, Germany, and France, and believes it can double annual sales to $3 billion within 5 years. So again, just a different paradigm from what we operate in developed economies, whether it's US, Canada, or Europe. So it really does make financial sense. And simply said, the key takeaway with this fact is that globalization does offer you an opportunity to achieve sales liftoff. Fact number 7, something that's very difficult to achieve, I have found. Don't have an answer for why. But to get global, you need to get local. And what I mean by that is that you can't sell a smoked ham sandwich in the Middle East. You do have to transcend the barriers of distance, culture, language, and so on and so forth. McCain Foods, once again, is a very good example. What you're seeing up there is a product called aloo tikki, which is a French fry equivalent or a variation, if you will, of French fries, or a potato product for the Indian market. And Susan Rogers, who's the vice president of global communications, has really paraphrased this, I think, quite accurately. The company's goal in every foreign market is to understand the local community and to be part of it. The result is that countries claim McCain as their own. In Great Britain, we are known as the British company. If you're in South Africa, South Africans think of McCain as a South African company. That is the ultimate, if you will. I know from experience, a lot of people think Lever Brothers is an Indian company. A lot of people in Latin America think Gillette Presto Barba is a Latin American company. That's the ultimate, if you will, accomplishment to get local. I do have another example that I want to show you and sort of dwell a little bit on getting local. These are pictures I took when I was in China. And what you're seeing is this gentleman is, it's early in the morning, 6 o'clock. It's on a street corner in Beijing, and he's actually frying, deep frying dough sticks. It's called youtiao. And youtiao is a quintessential breakfast in China. And you have those deep fried dough sticks with soup. And KFC, which is a great example of a restaurant operator or a quick service restaurant that has adopted its product offering to a local taste. KFC was very quick to offer youtiao as part of their breakfast menu. And if you go to China, then even beyond McDonald's, KFC has achieved a success that is really enviable because of this one fact. They got local. He Chi, a 35-year-old employee at a Shanghai advertising agency, visits KFC 3 or 4 times a week to eat fish, porridge, and egg tarts. Now that's localization for you, for a KFC. The US fast food giant has discovered it can't rely on a foreign brand name for growth, and must instead adopt to local tastes and lifestyles. And very important, the key takeaway is export your expertise. Don't export your products. We didn't have the same products that Gillette Mach 3 wasn't available in the 200 countries of the world, by the way. It only was available to the countries that made sense. So we had different products in different markets. What we did was we exported our shaving expertise. So that is my message, and that is a key message that I'd like to impart when it comes to this fact in terms of getting local. Export your expertise and not your products. Globalization, without a shadow of a doubt, is big thinking, visionary thinking. John F. Kennedy famously was quoted as saying, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." nothing significant was ever achieved without big thinking. Nothing. And that applies for globalization as well. McDonald's, the incredible growth and success can be summed up with the first thought that went through Ray Kroc's mind when he first saw McDonald's. This will go any place. King C. Gillette saw the razor he had invented, and he saw it as a universal product. He felt sure Gillette blades and razors would one day be sold by the millions in every corner of the planet. He was driven by this very early on. Within the first 5 years, Gillette was in Europe, which at that time was an emerging economy. I'm talking about early 1900s. Let's not underestimate the drive and the vision and the importance of big thinking. It's apparent here. It happened at MaRS. We're here today, we're having this discussion, this fabulous facility, the great job that everyone is doing. It started with a vision that happened, that came about from the founders of MaRS. So I think big thinking is very crucial, and I think sometimes when I come across international plans and I don't spot that, I can tell you'll have a very lukewarm international initiative if it's not backed up by big thinking. The Vancouver Olympics, which were, I guess many call it the most successful ever for Canada, it started with a vision. The 2010 Games would not have been such a success without many heroic performers, but it was Mr. Furlong's vision that fired it. He developed his bold approach years before the Olympics began. An essay he penned for a Vancouver newspaper in 2003 headlined, "What Dreams May Come," reads as if it was written yesterday, in 2003. So I just wanted to impress upon you this importance of big thinking, because big results equal big thinking always. And unfortunately, the opposite is also true. Small results often come about because of small thinking. Fact number 9, big thinking alone, although it's important, is not enough. You need to back that up with smart planning, a drive that's backed up with a plan that, in my mind and my experience, has to have two crucial ingredients for success, if it is to be considered a smart plan going international, and that's know-how and discipline. Those two factors need to be represented in the plan. And let me define a little bit what I mean by know-how. It's a little bit different than knowledge. Knowledge is a higher order of awareness that tells you why. But I think know-how is a higher order of knowledge that actually tells you how. So knowledge is why, know-how is how. Knowledge creates intent, know-how creates action, which is why I think you need know-how, because it's what really sparks that eagerness. It's what really sparks that go-getter attitude, whether it was Gillette, whether it was here at MaRS, whatever. Discipline is the other imperative, and this, simply put, is what makes the fine art of international expansion a science, albeit an inexact one. But following a disciplined process, a methodical process, is crucial. There is a way to get this done. It should not be approached as an ad hoc basis. I know most of us do it that way. I've often heard people give advice, just hop on a plane. Just hop on a plane, go on to China. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Spend the time in advance and think about it. Know what you're looking for before you go to China. Hone in, target in terms of what you want to find, and then your trip to China will be a lot more productive. So I think there is a disciplined way to do this. So your plan needs to have know-how, it needs to have discipline. An intelligent plan is the first step to success. The man who plans knows where he's going. He knows what progress he's making, and he has a pretty good idea when he will arrive. Clarity is a wonderful thing, I think. The key takeaway is don't focus so much on getting international, but focus on getting it right. Venturing abroad is a compelling proposition, absolutely compelling, but only if it's done right. And in order to get it right, hire an expert. If you don't know how, don't do it yourself. Hire an expert. What qualifies as an expert? Somebody who has actual in-market experience, a practitioner, who's developed a trained eye after years and years of operating in the global marketplace. It's actually tough. It's actually tough to find, at least in my mind, a really qualified trained expert, because it's not just the fact that you need to find somebody that has worked in international markets. No, because often you'll find people that are operators that have been presented a plan and that have taken the plan and have mastered the execution part. Well, you're not worried about execution at this stage. If you're in the early stages, you're worried about developing a proper, clear, concise plan. So you really need to find somebody that's a practitioner, but also a practitioner that has a full arsenal of experience, a varied experience when it comes to strategic planning, as well as executional and operational experience. That, in my mind, is an expert, and that, in my mind, will actually get you somebody who can develop a smart plan for you. Fact number 10, globalization is effective implementation. Colin Powell said, planning without execution is hallucination. It's true. It's my biggest obstacle. This is my nightmare when I deal with Canadian clients. I don't know why. We have a hesitancy in putting, people on the ground. When I say export your competence, export your expertise and not your products, that's what I mean. And I'm baffled. I just don't have an answer for you. But everything you do up until this stage is actually useless if you don't invest in people and a team that's willing to grow, that's willing to go across borders and work in international markets. Now, that doesn't mean that you need 5,000 people or 500 people, even 50. Sometimes, in fact, most of the times, it's just about 2 or 3 people. And even of those 3, it's one key guy who's well experienced in your organization, who understands the corporate strategy and has the capability to translate it with some help, local market help, at the local market level. I think it's more of a psychological barrier that we face. Somehow we perhaps equate, people to the 2-legged beast. I mean, it's just too expensive or something. I don't know what it is, but this can be a pretty big barrier. A fascinating example is Toon Boom, a Quebec company that's specialized in animation. And when they went to India, they single-handedly, the animation industry didn't even exist there. And when they went to India, they single-handedly grew the Indian animation industry from scratch to $2 billion. They've recently moved their headquarters now to a bigger and larger building. Joan Wogalasang, their CEO, has a great quote. Your staff should be willing to relocate and help train overseas clients. You can't just set up a partner and leave them alone. You have to work in the trenches and support them as you would your own company. And in my entire experience, if there's one thing that I've lived and seen and that I can vouch for is that fact. So if you are looking for effective implementation, please focus and please be willing to invest in an on-the-ground team, because an on-the-ground presence is very, very crucial. So those were my 10 facts. I tried to present them in a very simple way. I hope they make a difference, and I hope they've actually managed to not only provided you a different perspective, perhaps, of international expansion, but I hope they've actually made you imagine what a global Canada could really look like. Thank you. I guess we have questions now, or go for it. We do have a microphone here, by the way. If
Can you hear me?
yes, I can.
So I recently attended a government trade mission to Brazil, and it was really interesting actually getting their feedback and understanding kind of how the sales cycle and culture is really different. So could you speak to someone that's just starting out and really trying to investigate going global and probably deciding to go to Brazil first before going to Asia, right? And also joining forces with Europe and Portugal, and taking a strategy not so much Asia focused, but more Latin America and Europe.
And the question is that what you should do for Brazil? Sorry, I didn't quite understand.
Sorry, so from a technology perspective, like some things to be aware of, offshoring, outsourcing, different options, different strategies in terms of targeting those markets.
A few things, a few comments. It does seem as though that you've already made up your mind about Brazil and Latin America.
Yeah, so the global decision is that.
Okay. So that part has been sort of taken care of. My biggest advice to you will be to invest the time and effort in researching Brazil. And you don't have to go to Brazil for that, by the way. Within your industry, whenever we are working for a client, we spend about 2 or 3 months exclusively focused on the client's business, be it Brazil or wherever. Sitting here in Toronto, there's so much available right now on the web and in other sort of places, government institutions, trade missions, the Brazilian embassy. There's so much you can gain at a fraction of the cost in your own comfortable confines of your home here in Toronto. Spend 2 months exclusively on your product with respect to Brazil. Understand the market, understand the consumers, any business plan, any template will let you show you that. The competition, the pricing, the margins, you can get all of that. It's amazing. We actually draft, by the way, just for your information, we draft an actual market entry plan for a China or Brazil or India here in Toronto. And then we travel. And once you travel, you're really focused because you know so much about the market, Brazil, before even getting there. And you've got focused vision, you know exactly what you're looking for. And when you go there, when you land there, you find out new things and you change your plan based on your new findings. So my number one advice to you is, if you're looking to get global and if you're looking to focus on Brazil, is develop an in-depth market entry plan for Brazil, for your product, whatever that is, in terms of what consumers you're going after, what makes you different, all the typical business, if you will, factors. I'm not going to use words like value proposition and all that stuff. I want to keep this very simple language here. But if you can't take with you what you're trying to sell in a briefcase, don't take it. So, and I use that figuratively speaking. if you are in a technologically, if you are trying to market a technology product, focus on that expertise. If it's the expertise, like I used the Montreal example, if you can handle more than 500 calls in a switch in a moment, you can handle 2,000. Well, that's the expertise that you take. So that's what I would advise. If you are looking to go into Brazil, do the upfront market research first, follow that up with a market trip, update your market entry plan. Last step, if you are looking for a joint venture partner, then that's when you should look for a joint venture partner. Don't look for a joint venture partner in the early stages of the game, because the joint venture partner needs to be profiled based on your market entry plan.
Thank you for your remarks. They ring very much true to my ears. But I have one question. I call it very roughly the enemy within, and that is the organization that decides to go overseas, develop international markets, yet have a problem at home in delegating, like what you call think global, be local, delegating local authority, and that usually the ideas seem to collapse in the parent organization that doesn't have the international horizon. I wonder if you could make some remarks to that. I'm not in the high volume business like Gillette, but in the high tech sector where local support is a crucial element to make anything work. And it usually collapses because of the unwillingness of delegating that authority into the local markets. Maybe you have some remarks to make there, please.
Yeah, it's a very good question. The enemy from within, I actually like that. Yeah, if you're working for an organization that is not committed, or that doesn't have the same vision of going global, then you will face constant impediments and barriers as you go along the process. And like you said, that there will be perhaps an unwillingness at a certain stage to delegate some of the task at the local market level, which is actually crucial. And I think there's a way, although it's a very difficult one. It's what we usually, it's the approach that we take. Don't work on the plan, don't work on the execution, don't work on any one of that. Until and unless you've changed the paradigm, and until and unless you've established a certain perspective of what the international opportunity can mean for you, for this organization, for this company, don't go ahead with the plan, because there will be impediments. And the way to do that is what we do is that we share these facts. And then, by the way, there are there are not only 10 facts, obviously, there are a lot more facts, but try to customize these facts according to your own business, and you will find great examples. If you're in the technology business, you'll find great examples, almost identical players that are in your industry, that are far younger than you as in terms of a corporation, that are achieving 5 times, 10 times the growth, just because of the environment that they're operating in. So I think if you establish that vision, if you establish that horizon, the paradigm, and the perspective, before you take the actual leap into the foreign market, and before you actually go into the process of expanding abroad, that's going to help you. So gain alignment. That's my advice. Gain alignment with senior management, not just in the front end of the process, but all the way to the end. This fact that I just talked about, on the ground management team, if I don't have commitment for that, I don't take up the client. So gain alignment up front on all the aspects of going international. And if you have that, go ahead. If you don't, then go back to square one and try to see why there's a difference in perspective.
Thank you very much for your talk. And you mentioned value proposition. And what I'd like to know is, from your experience, a value proposition that works in Canada or North America, well does it work abroad, and does your experience indicate that you change that value proposition from region to region?
Very good question. A very good question. I think it's coming up with a value proposition is the most, what's the right word? Is the most underestimated. It's a very difficult task. That's what I'm trying to say. And we like to come up with these fancy statements, whatever. But this whole process of export your core competence or your core expertise, which, by the way, in our step-by-step process to go global is step number one. This whole process, which is, by the way, 10 steps. The step number one is find out what your core competence is, which is your value proposition. And we will often find, in fact, I've never been in a situation where we've not had to change the value proposition, because companies often think they know what their core expertise is. And as you drill down further and further, it takes us about a month or 2 months, but we eventually come up with a platform that is much more higher level. I think if you, and maybe I'm going against with a lot of the stuff that you've been taught, because I am an MBA, I do have all the technical sort of qualifications for a business, but I think if you sort of combine that with the practitioner's experience, you do sometimes question sometimes what you've been taught. If don't get too specific. I found companies that have a very specific value propositions are the ones that lose sight of the big picture. And I'll use an example. KFC's value proposition, Kentucky Fried Chicken's value proposition was not that they could supply or they could market fried chicken, I guess. What it really was, and I've not had KFC as a client, but when you see what they've done, what it really was is to offer this restaurant experience that was unheard of in a market like India or China. Cleanliness, quality, consistency. And they realized that, that's what they're offering. They're offering their core competence is this experience of dining in a KFC restaurant. It doesn't have to do anything with chicken. It wasn't specific enough, which is why they're serving porridge and youtiao and all. Now they have obviously chicken, but to answer your question, try to define your value proposition in very. Now, making things simple is the most difficult thing in the world, and I always try to make it simple. By the way, because once you go through that process, everything is a lot more clear in your mind. Spend a long time, however long it takes, in defining your value proposition in a very simple term. Okay. Now, one thing that has to have is that it has to be unique to you. Because if it's not unique, it's not a value proposition. Now, I don't know what your business is, what your product is, but break it down to the lowest common denominator. And if you can match that proposition to an actual need in a certain marketplace, then I think you're well set to go.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you're not redefining the value proposition.
No.
Region to region.
Oh, yeah, first, what I'm saying is that if you have a value proposition, make sure it's the right one. And in order to make sure it's the right one is that make sure it's very simple. It's not specific to a certain product or to a certain service. That's the first thing that I'm saying. Once you know what it is and you're satisfied with it, then you make sure that that's what you export in its entirety, 100%. Make no mistake. Because if you change your core proposition, if you change your competence, then you don't have anything to export. So yes, well said. That's exactly what I'm saying. Don't change your value proposition.
Thank you.
Excellent presentation, but I have the baseline question for you. SMEs in Canada are having enough trouble getting financing and funding, finding capital sources, et cetera. How do you suggest they position themselves, recognizing that they actually have to have the plan, they have to have the foresight and everything else in place? Most of them that I'm working with do have all that, but it's being able to get the additional capital that they need to expand on a much more global basis.
Good question. Depending on how you approach it, international expansion doesn't require size or dollars. I know there's an impression that it does, but it doesn't. If you're an SME, well, first of all, timing has to be right. If you're an SME, you need to first achieve a certain amount of corporate scale. You need to have a certain amount of dollar revenue, I guess. And once you have that, every industry, every product, every company has their own. Then what a lot of people don't realize is that it doesn't take a lot of effort or a lot of, not a lot of effort, but it doesn't take a lot of investment to get into a Brazil or India or a China. As compared to a new product, for example. The average investment for a new product is $50 million. Facts. We take companies international for a fraction amount of that. I've done it for less than $1 million. Now, if you have $1 million in sales, then you're not ready, because you do need to hire an expert. If you don't have the know-how yourself, you do need to have an expert. That's why I'm saying you have to have some level of corporate scale, 10 million, 5 million, whatever that is. But expanding to new markets is not a huge investment requirement. The other thing, by the way, is that the investment is not upfront like new products. In new products, the entire investment is upfront before you make your first dollar in sales. New market investments can be staggered based on achieving specific milestones. So you can, react and change. So really, it's a lot safer, if you will, quote unquote, investment versus other forms of, I guess, business strategies that you might sort of pursue. So this whole concept of, and companies like Gillette, McDonald's, Coke, I didn't talk about it here, Research in Motion, they all went global at a very early stage. So you don't have to wait until you're $100 million in business or something. No. There's an old adage, export early, export often. So, but only you can tell that, we do have this discretionary income now, and I can invest $500,000 or $1 million now. I do have that size. I do have this unique product. And I do have this vision to take this global, and let me start by, earmarking this to like $1 million or $500,000, whatever it is. So. Well, thank you.